Philadelphia, Mississippi. Freedom schools were teaching the African American students math, reading, African history, how to register to vote, and self-esteem. Michael Schwerner and James Cheney ran a freedom school along with a new summer volunteer, Andrew Goodman. The three were falsely arrested and ultimately murdered by the Mississippi Klan. Much media attention came to be, some speculated because two of the three were white and Jewish. Before their bodies were found, they found other bodies of murder victims. 41 days after they went missing, their bodies were found. Ella Baker, working with Martin Luther King Jr., spoke to the media. She was mostly accustomed to working behind the scenes. She said, "This tragedy has become a symbol. The unfortunate thing is that it took this kind of symbol to make the rest of the country turn its eye on the fact that there are other bodies lying under the swamps of Mississippi. Until the killing of a black mother's son becomes as important as the killing of a white mother's son, we who believe in freedom cannot rest." How ironic this happened in a town with a name meaning brotherly love. At a memorial to the three men, I noticed a small tin plate placed at the foot of the grave marker that said, "Never give up on the things you believe in." What do I believe? I believe light is stronger than darkness. Love is stronger than hate. And we are called to share God's light and love in this world. I believe I am called to do justice, to love kindness, to walk humbly with God. Micah 6:8.
The 15th Amendment to the Constitution granted African American men, not women, the right to vote in 1870. The reality was white supremacy created barriers to that right. In registering to vote, hurdles were placed before Black men. Questions were asked of them that were not asked of white voter registrants. Questions like, how many bubbles are there in a bar of soap? How many beans are in the jar on my desk? The Brennan Center for Justice, a think tank at a New York University law school, documented questions asked of a Black voter trying to register to vote in 1960 in Georgia. After showing Clarence Gaskin some objects on a table, the official asked, "How many kernels of corn are in the jar? How many bumps on the cucumber? How many seeds in the watermelon? How many bubbles in a bar of soap?" In the Freedom Summer of 1964, a large voter registration project took place in Mississippi to expand Black voting in the South. The effort was organized by civil rights groups such as CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, and SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. I graduated from high school in that year, 1964. I was aware of those efforts only through news services and major magazines. Later, when in college, I learned more about the efforts of voter registration from a friend, a former Presbyterian minister and grad student who had participated. In 1968, 12 of us students in urban and regional studies went on a study experience to the University of South Alabama in Mobile. It really raised my awareness of issues of diversity, of discrimination, and racism. It was a very hot summer, but the pool on the campus was locked rather than allowing it to comply with desegregation orders. In 1964, volunteers, mostly white from northern states, went south to promote voter registration. Michael Schwerner and Andrew Goodman from New York had been recruited by John Lewis. Of course, he is the deceased Congress member. In Mississippi, they worked with James Chaney, a Black civil rights activist from Meriden, Mississippi. All three worked to register voters. One evening, they went to Philadelphia, Mississippi to investigate a recent burning of Mount Zion Methodist Church, a Black church that was active in the voter registration movement. We visited that church on our civil rights trip and viewed the memorial marker in front of it while hearing the story. After leaving the church meeting, the three young men were stopped by law enforcement for speeding a few miles over the speed limit. They were booked and told to leave the county. The deputy sheriff, a Ku Klux Klan member, followed them, stopped their car, and ordered them into his car. On a deserted road, two other KKK carloads appeared. The three young men were beaten and shot and buried in an earthen dam. Their bodies were not found for almost 2 months, probably because two of the young men were white. The missing person case became national news, and the US Navy and the FBI got involved.
In the minds of the Georgia white people in charge of voter registration, bad things equated to Black people voting. In Minnesota, we had our own discrimination. In many cities, there are restrictive covenants forbidding the sale of property to Blacks, and financial institutions engaged in redlining where certain areas were off limits for financing to Blacks. Currently, Minnesota has the highest degree of disparity between whites and Blacks, especially in the areas of education and criminal justice.
I was disconcerted by the competing realities side by side in Montgomery, the capital of Alabama. There was the Southern Poverty Law Center's comprehensive civil rights museum and memorial. Around the corner from Dr. King's Dexter Avenue Baptist Parsonage, and walking distance from the Alabama State Capitol. This is where the Selma Montgomery Voting Rights March ended, and one of our group had been in that march. But it's also walking distance from the Confederate White House. And in the Capitol building, there's a gallery of Reconstruction era Black legislators who were elected and then ousted when Reconstruction was dismantled.
On the tour, we visited the Capitol in Montgomery, Alabama. And in the Capitol, there's a gallery of the Reconstruction era. After the Reconstruction Act of 1867, newly enfranchised Black men gained a voice in government for the very first time. There was a lot of hope that this would improve the status of Black voters. On a plaque in that gallery, there are the names of Black legislators who were elected and served after Reconstruction went into effect. In 1868, there were over 20 Black legislators. 10 years later, when Reconstruction came to a screeching halt, there was only one Black legislator. The KKK and other white supremacist organizations targeted political leaders and African Americans who challenged white authority. The Compromise of 1876 marked the real turning point in the downfall of Reconstruction. A bitterly contested presidential race between Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel Tilden resulted in a compromise where Hayes agreed to withdraw federal troops. They were there to support Reconstruction efforts in exchange for being certified as the winner of the election. That pretty much ended Reconstruction efforts. The rule of law is critical to civil rights. The rule of law is a standard by which governments across the world are evaluated around the world. Under one definition, it's a principle under which all persons, institutions, and entities are accountable to laws that are publicly promulgated, equally enforced, independently adjudicated, and are consistent with international human rights principles. On our tour, we were reminded frequently that laws without follow-up and enforcement are empty gestures. We learned and felt the impact of the May 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision that ruled segregation in schools is unconstitutional. We heard firsthand of the flight of white people to suburbs to avoid the impact of the ruling. The city schools in Birmingham remained basically underfunded Black schools. This is not unique to the South, however. Minnesota's racial disparities in education put us at the embarrassing #1 position in the nation. We stood outside of the country store where in August of 1955, 14-year-old Emmett Till from Chicago was visiting friends in Mississippi. He was brutally murdered for allegedly flirting with the white wife of the white store owner. The details of the murder and the attempted hiding of the mangled body are beyond horrific. We sat in the courthouse where the trial took place with the perpetrators, and we heard the story of that trial. The all-white, all-male jury deliberated for less than an hour and acquitted the 2 murderers after a sham trial. Justice was denied as the rule of law was flaunted.